Here's a truth that surprises many. Most DPIAs that go wrong don't fail at the risk stage. They fail right at the start, in scoping. Get the scope fuzzy, and everything built on top of it wobbles. It's a bit like building a house on a shaky foundation. So, what will you take away here? In just a few minutes, you'll learn how to define the scope of a DPIA crisply, set clear boundaries so it doesn't sprawl endlessly, and describe your processing activities and their purpose in a way regulators respect. We'll look at how to classify the categories of data and the people it affects, and how to bring the right stakeholders to the table: the DPO, the business, IT, and vendors, each with clear accountability. By the end, you'll be able to open any DPIA with confidence, knowing you framed it correctly from the very first step. Let's get into it. So let's begin with the question that quietly decides whether your entire DPIA succeeds. What exactly are we assessing? Defining the scope sounds obvious, but it's where so many teams stumble, and I'll show you why. Scope is simply the clear boundary around what your DPIA covers. Which processing activity, which system, which data, which purpose. Get this crisp, and everything downstream flows smoothly. Leave it vague, and you'll either miss critical risks or drown trying to assess everything under the sun. Let me share a real example. A client once asked me to run a DPIA on the marketing system. Sounds fine, right? But when we dug in, that so-called system included email campaigns, website tracking, a loyalty app, and a third-party analytics tool. Four very different things with very different risks. We had to split it up to make it manageable. So here's my guidance. Before you assess anything, write one clear sentence describing precisely what this DPIA covers. If you can't do that cleanly, your scope isn't ready yet. Ask yourself, could a colleague read my scope and know exactly what's in and what's out? That clarity is your starting point. Once you've defined your scope, the next challenge is keeping it there. Because DPIAs have a sneaky tendency to grow, and setting firm boundaries is how you stay in control. Let me explain what I mean. Boundaries answer the question, what's in and what's out. For example, you might decide your DPIA covers a new recruitment tool, but not the wider HR system it connects to. That's a legitimate boundary, as long as you note the connection and handle it separately. Without boundaries, one assessment quietly balloons into 10. Now, alongside boundaries, you map your stakeholders, the people who have a stake in this processing. Think of it like planning a wedding. You need to know who's involved before you can organize anything. Who owns the project? Who handles the data day to day? Who signs off on risk? Here's a quick story. On one project, we skipped proper stakeholder mapping and only later discovered a whole team was feeding data into the system that nobody had mentioned. It threw our timeline off badly. So ask yourself early, have I identified everyone who touches this data? Mapping them upfront saves painful surprises later. Now let's get to the heart of step 1. Describing what you're actually doing with the data and why. This is the part regulators read first, so let's make it strong. What does a good description really look like? At its core, you're answering 3 simple questions. What data are you collecting? What are you doing with it? And why? That last one, the purpose, is crucial. The law expects a clear, specific, legitimate reason, not something vague like for business use. Let me make this concrete. Instead of writing, we process customer data, a strong description says we collect customers' names, emails, and purchase history to send order confirmations and personalized offers based on consent. See the difference? One is fog, the other is crystal clear. Here's why this matters so much. When I review DPIAs, a weak purpose statement is usually the first red flag. If you can't explain precisely why you need the data, that's often a sign you're collecting more than you should. So take your time here. Ask yourself, could someone outside my team read this and instantly understand what we do and why? If yes, you've nailed the foundation of the whole assessment. Let's sharpen your description further by getting specific about two things: the categories of data you handle and the categories of data subjects, meaning the people that data belongs to. This precision really pays off, and here's why. Not all data carries the same weight. A name and email sit at one end. Health records, financial details, or biometric data sit at a far riskier end. So when you list your data categories, you're not just making an inventory, you're already hinting at where the risks will concentrate. Can you see how this sets up the risk work later? The same goes for data subjects. Are you processing data about your own employees, general customers, or vulnerable groups like children or patients? That distinction matters enormously because the law expects extra care for vulnerable individuals. Here's a practical example. A learning app for kids processes fairly ordinary data, names and progress scores. But because the data subjects are children, the risk profile jumps immediately. Same data, higher stakes. So as you scope, always ask two questions in parallel. What kind of data and whose data? Answer both clearly and your risk assessment later becomes far easier and far more accurate. Let's go deeper on the people side now, because a DPIA is genuinely a team sport, and knowing who does what prevents chaos. So let's clarify the three key players you'll almost always need. First, the business owner. This is the person who wants the project and understands its purpose, why it exists, what value it brings, what data it needs. They set the context. Second, the IT or engineering team. They know the plumbing, where data lives, how it moves, which systems connect. Without them, your data flow picture stays incomplete. And third, the DPO, the data protection officer, who brings the privacy lens, offers guidance, and often provides that crucial sign-off. Think of it like a hospital. The business owner is the patient explaining the problem. IT is the specialist running the tests, and the DPO is the senior doctor ensuring everything's done safely and by the book. Here's what I've learned. When these three genuinely collaborate, DPIAs are smooth and insightful. When one is missing, gaps appear fast. So before you start, ask yourself, do I have all three voices at the table? Getting the right people involved early is half the job done. Now let's widen the circle a little, because in the real world, your processing rarely happens inside your four walls alone. Legal, compliance, and vendors all play a role, and accountability has to be crystal clear. Let me walk you through why. Start with legal and compliance. They help confirm your lawful basis, interpret regulatory nuances, and make sure your DPIA holds up if challenged. Think of them as your safety net for the tricky judgment calls. It's always better to loop them in early than to scramble later. Then there are vendors, and this is where many organizations get caught out. When you hand data to a third party, a cloud provider, an analytics firm, a payroll processor, you don't hand over your responsibility, you remain accountable. Let me give you a real example. A company using an external email marketing tool suffered a breach at that vendor. Guess who the regulator held responsible? The company, not just the vendor. So here's the mindset I want you to adopt. For every party touching your data, ask, who is accountable for what, and is that written down? Clear accountability isn't bureaucracy, it's protection. Nail this and your DPIA stands on solid ground. Let's bring step 1 together, because scoping done well makes everything that follows so much easier. So what should you carry forward? First, define your scope in one clear sentence and set firm boundaries so the DPIA doesn't sprawl. Remember that marketing system that turned out to be 4 systems? Clarity upfront saves you later. Second, describe your processing and purpose precisely and identify your data categories and data subjects, because that's where risk starts to reveal itself. Think back to the children's learning app. Same data, higher stakes. And third, get the right people around the table, the business, IT, the DPO, plus legal, compliance, and clear vendor accountability. A DPIA is a team sport, always. Now, if this is helping you, do hit subscribe because we release practical privacy training like this regularly and I'd hate for you to miss it. The full playlist link is in the description and clicking it shows every video in order. And for a deeper dive with role plays, quizzes, and practice tests, my complete Udemy course titled Conducting DPA is linked in the description too. Next up, we map how data actually flows. See you there.